to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in their government and to influence public policy through education and advocacy. Tonight we have a unique opportunity to speak directly to the 3 taxing entities here in Shaker Heights and find out directly from them their goals for our city. I'd like to thank Mayor Leiken, who will give us an overview of his vision for Shaker's future, as well as our panelists, Amy Switzer, Director of the Shaker Public Library, Chad Anderson, the President of the Board of Trustees of Shaker Library, William Clawson, President of the Board, Shaker Heights Board of Education, Stephen Wilkins, he's the Assistant Superintendent of Shaker Heights Schools, Roeder, Shaker City Council, and Nancy Moore, Shaker City Council. I'd also like to introduce you to our moderator, Pamela Beck. Pam is a League of Women Voters member and former president of the Shaker League. Take it away, Pam.
Thank you, Audrey. Let me check for sure. Can you hear us in the back? Okay, good, terrific. We are here tonight so that all of us, audience and participants alike, can understand the facts and the interactions of the 3 bodies that are represented here. The quintessential facts will be provided by the opening presentations and can be built upon during the question and answer period. We look forward to Mayor Earl Leiken's brief overview to be followed by 10-minute presentations by each of the 3 teams. We will then have a question and answer period of 40 minutes. Questions must be submitted in writing. And you can direct your question to one, more than one, or all of the bodies. Cards are available and will be picked up by our runners for review. At that point, during the question and answer period, each panelist will have can do a response of not more than 2 minutes. We have a tight agenda, response material, so time limits will be followed precisely. When a speaker's time is up, I will say, thank you, and we will proceed to the next speaker. And at this point, I am delighted to invite Mayor Earl Leiken to the podium to give his remarks.
Thank you very much to the League for the opportunity to make some preliminary comments on the context in which we're working today in Shaker and also on the impact that proposed tax increases may have on us in our future. 40 years ago, when my wife and I first came to the community, Cleveland was a booming manufacturing center with 750,000 people. Shaker Heights, which was closely tied to the Cleveland economy, had 36,000 people, and we were at our peak. Taxes were relatively low compared to where they are today, and tax increases were not as much of a problem or an issue. But things were already beginning to change. As we know, our world has been transformed by technology, automation, globalization. The winners have been cities like New York, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle. The losers, unfortunately, have been cities like Cleveland and Detroit. What we've experienced have been losses of population that reflect the losses in jobs in our area. From 1970 to 2010, the city of Cleveland lost half its population. The county lost 25%, or 400,000 people, and Shaker lost 8,000 residents. We have been doing better than other inner-ring suburbs because of the quality of our housing, our strong community identity, and our good schools. But we have still declined significantly. The problem for us has been exacerbated by competition from the outer ring suburbs for residents and businesses. During that same time period, Solon and Westlake have grown by 100%. Hudson has grown by 466%. Many businesses have also moved to the outer ring. City Council and I are committed to reverse the trend for Shaker, to a program of growth, to compete with the outer ring suburbs, to attract businesses and residents, and to assure the long-term sustainability of Shaker Heights. Van Aiken is a part of this. Our strategic housing plan to increase demand for Shaker houses is a part of this. But the Mayor's Financial Task Force, a group of people with financial backgrounds active in the community that I've assembled to look at our community, is also a part. They've urged either avoidance or moderation in tax increases, and recognizing that this is a library board's decision, consideration of the county library system as an alternative to any tax increases for our own system. Taxes are a two-edged sword. They provide needed revenue for educational, municipal, or library services, but at the same time, they can be an impediment to growth and even retention of residents and businesses. Our current situation involves 4 very recent major tax increases in the last 10 years in Shaker, including a 0.5% increase in Cleveland for many of our residents who work there. I've been in close touch with our real estate community. What I'm hearing is the following. They've told us of the significant challenge they have in today's market of convincing buyers to purchase in Shaker when taxes are so much lower in places like Solon, Pepper Pike, and Chagrin Falls. They've expressed concern that higher taxes will lead to even lower home values here. They've urged us to hold steady and avoid any tax increases for the next several years. We can't avoid any tax increases for the next several years because the schools have an immediate need for capital repairs. However, I am concerned about some of the proposals that are before us at this time, however well-intentioned they may be. In this climate, the last thing I think we want to do is double down on growth and tax increases. I know the schools are considering different options, but one involves a $50 million proposal to build a new middle school, which would be more than twice anything that the schools have proposed in the past. That is a concern. The library request just adds further to the taxpayer burden. That $56 per 100,000 that they've estimated it would cost compounds itself for the more expensive homes, which are currently the most difficult to sell. And that's particularly true when you consider the tax decrease that we could experience if we went with the county system. In lieu of these proposals, I would urge the school board to consider a less expensive alternative, the library board to work with the city in finding a less expensive means of providing library services to minimize the tax burden on our residents, to maximize our ability to attract new residents and businesses, and so that we can all work together to assure Shaker's long-term sustainability and success. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Leiken. And now we will start with the library to do your presentation. So you're going to use it? Okay.
So I'm Amy Switzer, and I'm the library director. Chad Anderson and I are going to kind of take turns a little bit. We'll try to do it gracefully at the podium. But here at Shaker Library, we are actually in the middle of a process to decide how to address Shaker's library's facility challenges. We do have a facilities challenge that needs a permanent solution. Our library facilities are old, and they cost Shaker residents money and services. These are all fairly recent photographs. And there are costs to that. A recent facility assessment said that we could expect to spend about $5.1 million in capital repairs and maintenance And that is about $4.1 million at the main library and about $1 million at the Bertram Woods branch. But there are costs to this. There are costs if you visited us, you may have found that you were way too hot or possibly way too cold, because we've had a lot of issues with our HVAC and at times have actually had to close the library. Main library has some access issues that make it difficult for some of our residents to use the library, and layout issues can make it also difficult for people to use the library. We are gathering community feedback, and frankly, we've actually adjusted our thinking based on the feedback that we've received from residents. And as part of gathering that feedback, we asked residents 2 key questions. I have not kept up, or I have gone ahead. There we are, sorry. And the 2 key questions that we've asked are, what do Shaker residents want, and what is the best way to deliver it? So what do Shaker residents want? They want a library that they can use to meet their diverse set of needs. We visit our library in Shaker over 3 times as much as the national average. And Ohio residents actually have the highest usage per capita of libraries in the nation, but Shaker residents use their library almost twice as often as the national average. And in addition to visiting the library a lot, we actually borrow a lot from the library. We borrow more than 4 times as many items as the national average and more than double the state average. In a recent poll of Shaker residents, almost 4 out of 5 residents said that they use the library at least once a year. And over half said that they use the library at least once a month. And in that same poll, they told us how much they appreciate the library and what a good job that they think the library is doing. 77% agreed that they were satisfied with the library. 71% said we do a good job with our money. 73% strongly agreed that a good library is important to Shaker's quality of life. And 73% disagreed that the internet and ebooks make libraries less important. Our collection is central to our service, and we're proud of it, but our community uses us in a lot of other ways as well. We're an important community gathering place and serve as a de facto community center for Shaker. Our Play and Learn station for early childhood education helps many families in the community. In our teen center, teens can gather to study, socialize, do homework, or just find a place of community and acceptance. Our art gallery displays the work of local artists. Our community entrepreneurial office provides co-working space. Our career transition center assists with job searching as well as resume and interview skills. And the main library is an important anchor in the Moreland neighborhood, and we work to actively support the city's housing plan in the Moreland neighborhood. At first, we thought that replacing 2 aging facilities with 1 new facility was going to be a great idea. We held World Cafes in 2014 where we asked the community for feedback about consolidating both of our libraries into a single new facility. It would save money because we would have a single facility that was purpose-built to be a library and be more energy efficient and let us add amenities. Shaker residents told us they didn't think that was such a great idea. We hired Triad Research Group to conduct a representative poll of registered voters in our school district. We didn't know the millage associated at the time, but we did know it was more expensive to have 2 buildings than to have just 1 new facility that was designed as a library. But even if it's meant saving $1 million, Shaker residents said that only 29% supported building a new main library and closing the Bertram Woods branch. 74% told us that they thought the main library was an historic building that should be preserved. And 72% told us they thought that we should renovate and update both buildings. 64% said it was more important to keep the Bertram Woods branch open than it was to build a new main library. And switch over to chat really quickly.
So based on this feedback, the board did a comprehensive review to look at a number of different options of what would be best for the Shaker community. We ultimately evaluated 7 different options, and just briefly, the headline kind of tells you what they are. So maintaining, right, is keeping both buildings roughly as they are, but doing necessary repairs. Replacing is the one we talked about, 2 buildings into 1 new one. Upgrade, right, is to keep both buildings, but also do some improvements to make them a 21st century library. And we also looked at some other options that were potentially less expensive. Limit, which was an option to try and make the main library more efficient by bringing all operations to the 1st floor. Joint co-locate, our partners in the Shaker schools obviously are looking at a major building program. If it was advantageous, right, to potentially use the Woods property, there was an opportunity to co-locate in a single building on the Woods side. Contract, which is really keeping the existing village as it was, right, and trying to do the maintenance, which probably means operating just the main library and closing the Woods branch. And finally, combine. We reached out to the Cuyahoga County Public Library System in May in June of this year to try to understand what that option would look like. We did a comprehensive look. There's no way you're going to be able to read this chart, but it's my plug to ask you to kind of look at our comprehensive 50-page study that went through this and explains it in more detail than what we'll be able to do tonight. But the board came up with 6 primary criteria that we would evaluate all 7 of these options against. The way you read the chart is the more filled in the circle, the more completely it meets the criteria. And the main takeaway is that upgrade, the third one down, was really the highest. Okay, operating existing buildings with service and capital improvements and completing the required repairs. And we'll talk about a little bit why we think this is the best option. Andrew, tell us what we can get.
What can we get for that, right? Well, we think that, and again, I encourage you to look at the full study on our website, but upgrade is the best option because it gives Shaker residents what they told us they wanted, and is the most effective policy choice that best meets Shaker's needs, and provides the greatest return on investment with a strong community impact. Will be more useful and convenient for residents, and we expect that we will be used more as a result. This will also let us save approximately $250,000 a year in operating costs, and let us have expanded hours and greater service. We plan on having improved meeting and community gathering space, including more quiet study rooms and updated meeting rooms that are flexible and let us use up-to-date technology. We want the library to be even more inviting, convenient, and accessible for everyone. And that includes moving our most popular services down to the first floor, including the community center. And more convenient and family-friendly spaces for kids and teens, and a teen area that's open all of the hours that the library is open. We recognize that people want to use the library in different ways, and that means providing places where people can work very quietly, but also where they can work collaboratively and with flexible, adaptable furniture. Also imagine a space with some up-to-date technology and tools, with trained library staff to help you use those technology and tools. And we'll also provide tools to make sure that everyone can connect with the digital world and access and successfully use digital media. We want to make sure that no one is left behind. And now I'm going to transition it back to Chad.
So the detailed funding analysis will come, but we can paint in broad brushes how we think this will ultimately work out. The first thing to note is Shaker Library is actually operating with a budget that's smaller than it was 10 years ago. If you look back 10 years, this is a chart that shows the local property tax funding on the bottom, about 2/3, and state funding on the top. We had a budget or a revenue of $4.97 million back in 2005. We are currently operating at 4.55. So both your taxes that you pay in as property owners have gone down, as has state funding, which was significantly cut in the last recession. Here's a little fun fact. You're paying 27% less in Shaker Library property tax than you did in 2009. This is a result of reassessment, and there's a law called HB 920, which for libraries and schools means that reassessments push down the revenue, but they cannot rise back up. So I'm still waiting for the person in the community to slap me on the back and say, it's amazing, I noticed my library taxes fell by 25%. It's still time. In the last 29 years, the Shaker Library has asked for a millage increase once, okay? And that was 20 years ago. In the interim period, there have been 2 cases where we participated in the schools for a bond issue of about $1 million each over that period, but again, even that was more than 9 years ago. Cost estimate for upgrade, the $5.1 million in repairs that we talked about, $7.5 million of improvements. Those improvements enable, in no small part, that $250,000 in annual operating savings. So the cost of upgrade is only slightly more than just maintaining the buildings as they are. Put it in perspective, right? It should be about $56 annually, or about $1 a week for every $100,000 in property valuation. The board is prepared to make a pledge to stay off the ballot for the next 10 years if this is approved, and with HB 920, we've shown in practice it's effective at doing that. Shaker Library accounts for 2.0% of your voted property tax millage. If this were to pass, it would represent 2.7%. I believe I'm at time. I'm getting a thank you, but that's our overview. Thank you very much for your consideration.
So thank you, Ms. Switzer and Mr. Anderson. And now the schools will make their presentation with Mr. Clawson and Mr. Wilkins. Wilkins.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you,
everyone in the league for allowing us the opportunity this evening to give you a little update on the school and talk about some of the capital planning we're thinking. So highlights, first of all, Mr. Chrisman and the Treasurer's Department has done an incredible job making sure we have very clean books here in Shaker Heights for the schools. Another unqualified audit. This is probably close to 2 decades that they've won that award from the state, so high praise. No operating levy. I'm sure many of you remember that every 3-year cycle, 9.9 mil, the Board of Education stepped back from that and said, we don't want that pattern. That's not sustainable for our community. Our last levy was 4 years from the prior one, and it was 6.9 mils. We're now looking at least a 6-year cycle and continuing that lower millage request when we do go to the ballot for an operating levy. The school has hired over 100 new members and staff in the prior year as a result of the many retirements that resulted from the state changes in the retirement system. So we have a lot of new teachers to our community and other staff members who are bringing great innovative ideas to us. And finally, just on some of the new programming, many of you may have heard about Shaker's First Class, a pre-K program designed to help keep our students, or get them available and ready for kindergarten, starting when they're 3 years old. It's going incredibly well. We actually got a 5-star rating from the state for our program. Summer enrichment, it's been changed from not just a remedial summer programming to actual enrichment, and a little bit of fun too. AP Computer Science and Intro to Computer Science are new courses at the high school to keep our students abreast of the changes there. And you probably all know about Wes Lowry, class of 08, and Catherine Schultz, class of 95, Pulitzer Prize winners from Shaker Heights, both in the same year. I can't say enough about the class of 2016, except that I'm glad I wasn't a part of them because I would not look nearly as good. Very distinctive results. Every Ivy League, saw admittance along with MIT, the Naval Academy, Juilliard, you name it, our kids got into it. Key awards, many of the awards on the list up there are for 1 or 2 for within a state or several students across the entire country. Distinctive awards won by our students. And don't forget about the arts. We do not. Lots of awards there you can see as well. Well, they don't slouch on the field either. So the crew team continues to excel. They just came back from Cambridge and competing ahead of the Charles. We have our fencing team, which both men and women have won 1st and 2nd place in the states. Lyle Diver, very distinctive award for him. He's one of 24 students that have been named to the junior national team. Hockey, another Barron's Cup. Field hockey, competed for the runner-up status this year, came very close, but the 2nd time in 3 years for them on the state stage. Cross country has come out of nowhere, such that they are back for the 2nd year in a row after never appearing in state competition, placed 7th. Boys team lost to the #1 team in the state, actually one of the #1 teams I think in the country. Came close after an 18-1 season. And then even our middle schoolers. Our middle schoolers are doing well. 2 students went off to Innsbruck for the Children's International Games. Co-curricular activities are unmatched. You see a photo there of the 450 students and chaperones and band directors, friends and family that went to Spain this past spring break. The picture is actually in the Leiken soccer stadium where they played to 6,200 fans who literally were praising us over Twitter. The mayor wanted to become sister cities with our community. Arts awards, the Cuyahoga County Regional Scholastic Art Exhibition. In 2015, I think we took 45 awards, which was a record. We came back and took 68. We are producing incredible students. They're very gifted. We're doing wonderful things for the community. And it's giving back as well. Woodbury Creating Change created over 1,000 top plates to raise money for institutions like Edwin's up at the square. Don't forget Latin, 3 years in a row state champs, and even the Woodbury chess team is the elementary school champions. When we talk about our schools and try to compare them with neighboring communities, you see that we excel in so many different ways, even though we have some other challenges. The first one being the percentage of our students who are getting free or reduced lunch defined as economically disadvantaged. 42% of our high schoolers are receiving that status today. You see it's much lower in the other neighboring communities. That changes some of the services, the challenges our teachers have in creating or trying to teach to many different needs in the classroom. But we still excel because our teachers have, 100% of them have advanced degrees. We have more AP scholars. We have more with distinction and honor. We talked about those prestigious awards. You don't see those popping up in our other districts. We're producing incredible kids. Our SAT average, highest in the county, and you see it excels in is much higher than the other communities. Only school on that list that has an IB diploma, International Baccalaureate, and we offer more coursework for AP and IB for those high-performing students who want challenges. Now, to some of the capital discussions we've been having over the last 18 months. The chart before you, it's also in the packet that I hope you all have received, shows the process we've gone through. On the side, our first side of the chart here pertains to how we actually think about teaching going forward. So teachers and staff, over 200 of them got together over a couple days to lay out the educational vision that produced a report you can find on shaker.org if you want to look through all the details. But effectively, it really gets to the crux of what do we need to make sure we produce successful kids going forward. The right side is a more physical component of it, where we look at our facilities. And we utilized a service from the state where they came in and helped us assess our buildings, and it was a scary outcome. They told us we had $200 million in needs to bring our buildings up to the standards they thought were acceptable. $200 million. Well, clearly that's not something we can afford to do, and the board did not proceed in thinking about that. However, we did look at a couple of options that I'll go through now. Option one focuses on, or option A, excuse me, focuses on spending a little bit of money across all of our buildings. Focused on technology and hardware. We are lagging on that front, and it is hindering what our teachers can do in the classroom. We also are trying to create students who are able to collaborate and work together, because that's what the businesses and institutions that will employ them in the future are requiring of them. We need to have structures that enable that in a more simplistic manner. And then they're just blocking and tackling things. I like to refer to them as chillers, boilers, roofs. Nothing that's sexy about them, but they're old. And they have water underneath them, and we need to repair them to keep our students and teachers safe, warm, and dry. You see on this chart, we have a little money that's designed for the middle school. The middle school was defined as our building most in need. And in fact, $31 million in renovations were identified for that building. It's our youngest building, but it's actually our building that has the most challenges, both with its structure as well as with the educational structures and the challenges our teachers have to work through. This option, just to put it in perspective, would cost the taxpayer $100,000 in market value, about $11 per month. That's a 3.8 mils. Option B that the board is pursuing and considering to look at has all of the same functions of the other building works, so those technology upgrades, those furniture upgrades, those things that make things more collaborative for our students. But the right side has a little difference. New construction of a middle school that provides a strong foundation of a building that can be used not only for our middle schoolers, but for other functions throughout the community. The cost itself of the building to the district is about $23 million. We plan to privately fund our pool. We have our new director that's working with the Shaker Schools Foundation that would help us on that front. And auditorium athletic fields, $27 million, that would be funded by the district. And what you don't see on the slide is that $6.3 million in additional dollars would be coming from the state. It's a 24% co-funding for the main educational parts of the building. That building too, after we've done some detailed analysis and had some great experts come in and help us, would yield $500,000 in savings each year. Finally, you don't see it here, but bond expiration. So prior bonds are expiring between 2020 and 2026. 3.3 mils will come off of the taxpayers' ask, which would net out in this case to about 1.8 increment forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Clawson. I just want to mention that every once in a while, you might want to take a peek over here to the artistic note-taking that is taking place at the center. But, you know, stay focused on the information. And now we hear from City Council. So, Mr. Roeder and Ms. Moore.
Hello, everyone. I'm the City Council warm-up act. I'm going to leave most of the time to my colleague, Nancy Moore. First, I want to thank this panel for being here tonight. This is really something unprecedented that's happening here. Having a group from the library, the schools, and the city together to talk about what we're doing. Now, I want to point out that Chad Anderson put up a chart that had balls in there that were partially filled. It brought a smile to my face because Chad and I were in the same starting class 16 years ago at Booz Allen Hamilton, and that chart is called Harvey Ball chart. And I was so proud of him for figuring out a way to put a Harvey Ball chart into his library presentation. Now, but I have a challenge for Mr. Clawson because I believe you are an alumnus of the McKinsey & Company, so I'd like to see a Harvey Ball chart in one of your future presentations. I also want to thank everyone who's here tonight. As I look around the room, there are a lot of my peers from City Council, there are people from the Library Board of Trustees, there are people from the school board. Our former Mayor Rawson is sitting here up front with Mayor Leiken, so if your question doesn't get answered by this group, just turn to the person next to you, and odds are they know the answer to that. I also want to thank the League of Women Voters, Audrey and the others who are involved with this. Again, pulling together this not easy to pull together, unprecedented group of people across different organizations. December of last year, Mayor Leiken asked me to start and lead a new task force on 21st century government. And I said I'd be honored to do that. What does that mean? I then went to my peers on council and I met with them and I said, 21st century government, discuss. What does this mean to you? And what came back from my peers on council were, first, that they believed we needed a shared vision for our community. What is it that we want to be? Because when we're clear on what we want to be, then we know the tactics that we need and where we need to spend money in order to get there. Another thing that I heard from my peers on council is that they are very much believers in collaboration. How can we work with the other entities within the city? How can we work with other cities to get things done? So this conversation here tonight, although we may dive into, already have got into some specific things that are coming up in the next year or so, this conversation should also be about setting that larger picture vision for our community. What does Shaker look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And how can we, representatives of these different groups, and all of you as a community, how can we have a dialogue on a shared vision? And what does that joint planning process look like? So I'll hand off to my peer, Nancy Moore, to discuss more details on that.
Thank you, Trey, and good evening. If Trey's the warm-up act, I hope I'm not the one that stands in front of the curtain and gets pulled aside by the shepherd's crook. As a 20-year elected official, almost 21 years now in Shaker Heights, I served 8 years on the school board and 13 now on city council. So I have a real and true understanding and appreciation for all my fellow elected officials and appointed officials and their jobs. That said, I believe that I'm going to present a very personal viewpoint. I don't speak for all of City Council, but I want to say that given that two of the bodies that are up before us tonight are currently deciding to place a tax issue on the ballot, the schools for $55 million, possibly, the library for 1.6 mils, possibly, and given that since 2012, the city passed a 0.5% or 0.5% income tax increase. In 2016, the city of Cleveland passed a 0.5% income tax increase for Shaker residents working in Cleveland. In May of 2017, possibly the schools may be on the ballot for a bond issue that might possibly be $55 million. And in November 2017, the library may well be on the ballot for an additional 1.6 mils. And in the next several years, the schools will be back on the ballot for additional operating support. It's a fact of life in the state of Ohio. House Bill 920 absolutely predicts it. So, isn't it time for our taxing authorities, that is the city, the schools, and the library, to create an ongoing joint planning process to define future financial needs before placing those issues on the ballot? I want to be clear. We currently excel at talking at and reporting out to each other. We're all smart, we're all educated, and we're very good at our jobs. What is needed now is more than ever to stop operating from our own separate silos while we decide how much additional support we think we can get from the voters. Each taxing entity must begin to act like a brake, B-R-A-K-E, on the others by providing a stronger voice of restraint, without which needs become wants, and tax grabs that rely on the historic goodwill and support of Shaker residents will continue to escalate until the point of no return is reached within our community. The city has tried to provide a strong voice of restraint in the last year. We have argued that, first, in order to grow our tax base through new housing development and the Warrensville and Leiken redevelopment, we must minimize tax increases in order to be more competitive. While the nation has made progress in recovering for the housing downturn, my second point is the Cleveland region has not kept pace, unfortunately. If we are to compete in the housing market with other suburbs, even in our region, our tax burden must increase minimally or not at all. In order to accurately assess voter support for tax increases for the schools and the library before placing those issues on the ballot and deciding their size, I think we must do a better job of surveying our residents in order to determine the level of support that exists for a given tax increase. And last but not least, to remain an economically viable community in the 21st century, Shaker Heights can just not continue to replay the tape of what it was in 1960. While increasing taxes to pay for our city's schools and library, we must really begin to find new and better, even more creative ways to solve our fiscal challenges, and we must plan for our collective future, or we may well be and become the agents of our own demise. Thank you.
Thank you to all the teams that I think they put down the gauntlet, and it's not now time to deal with the issue. So we're going to have our question and answer period at this point. So if we have Terry over here with cards and so forth, and they will come down. Academic performance. School report cards make our schools look like they aren't doing the job needed. You know, those are the ones in the newspaper. Are the schools declining in quality? Or our schools are as good as ever, but more challenges, but quality being maintained? Are there ways to tell our story better? So that's a school. So you can come up here, or we can try to put this down to you. I think people will hear better with the microphone. Well,
So that's a thoughtful question, and one the Board of Education has asked about frequently as we look at the various components that go into state report cards. And Dr. Breeden is here actually, and she leads up our as Assistant Superintendent of our curriculum and instruction. So she's going to fill in anything that I might get gravely wrong. So a couple key points. You saw the long list of accolades that our students are achieving. If our report cards were truly reflective of what we were producing and what our students come back and tell us around this time every year about how well they're doing as they've gone off into college, we would be in panic mode. We would be worried if those two things were lining up. The report card is not telling the story that of things we're producing. What it is telling us, and I think the data strongly supports this, is that we have a number of students who are not as well off on a financial manner. All the data shows that if you are from a poor district or a poor or district, you are not going to perform well on that state test. In fact, only two school districts that had performed well, got an A, had very low economically disadvantaged. Does that mean we're not trying hard? We're not working towards it? No. We have lots of work to do. We've identified it in our strategic plan. We just understand that one test on one day is not reflective of what's actually being produced from our students.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to say anything? Okay. I'll just stand here. Okay, library. Is there a way to investigate what we would gain or what we would lose by joining the county library system? Could we investigate and then decide not to pursue if we did not like what we learned?
It's a good question. So we've been rather educated on the process, but back in May 2016, I did reach out to the president of the Cuyahoga County Public Library System and indicated that we wanted to explore just that question: what could Shaker residents expect if we were to pursue the inclusion option? And as part of that, we came up with a detailed 10-page list that we had kind of developed on the kinds of questions that we hope to have answered. You can find all these actually pages on the library website. So we're trying to be as transparent as possible about the process. You know, we got a response back that they couldn't necessarily do that. We did some annotated questions, and then we got kind of a few answers. But part of it is the issue that we kind of learned is the inclusion process. Let me kind of back up. We're trustees of the Shaker Heights Public Library. You all have invested in it for the last 8 years. It's not ours, right? We're not board of directors, right? We're board of trustees, right? Our job is to kind of manage that asset. And part of our process is we explored it, but we're not willing to give up that asset, right? Unless really we can be assured, right, of the quality of services that we would get under that situation. The reality is, under the inclusion law, what we learned is first that the county really can't answer many of the questions that we would need to have answered for the board to recommend inclusion. Okay? We're very concerned about what facilities would be operated, for how long, right? It's a collection development. They're not really able to give that to us. As a result, right, we weren't able to recommend giving away this asset. So I encourage you to kind of look at the questions, but really we weren't able to get the answers, and we can't recommend a vote for inclusion unless we can.
Okay, the next question. Level of taxation versus community quality. Our taxes are among the highest in the state, raising them as a deterrent to attracting new residents. Shaker residents know we pay high taxes but want high quality and are willing to pay for it. How do we reconcile these conflicting community views? Is that for the city council? And I think we need to...
And try not to strangle someone here.
Excellent question. As taxation goes up, the pool of people who are interested in the community goes down. So the way I think about this, and the way that we think about it on the 21st Century Government Task Force, is that we need to find ways to maintain or improve our quality of services at a lower cost. We have, as the mayor mentioned in his opening comments, we have a declining population in Shaker Heights, which is reflective of forces that are going on around us. And we have a level of taxation that's increasing. So those two forces don't work well together. Fewer people with a larger bill shared between them doesn't work well together. So how we do that again is maintaining or improving quality of services at a lower cost. And one of the keys to that is this sort of discussion. Traditionally, what's happened here in Shaker Heights is each of these three groups has had an independent planning process. With the joint planning that Nancy mentioned, we can then find opportunities between these organizations where we can be more efficient, where we can better use facilities, where we can combine, share, make more efficient some of the back office services that we're doing. And through this sort of an approach, we can build the community that we want while doing it cost effectively.
Yeah, that question is at the heart of things, and I think it's clear to everyone in this room that we employ, all of the entities here, people. Cities have, we have folks picking up our sanitation workers, we have police officials, we have fire department, a lot of people. The library has librarians and those who are supporting that. The school has lots of teachers, lots of our custodians and security professionals. Those don't trade and share well. There are some things we have looked at, buying salt collectively and leveraging the city's contract. One of the things at the middle school we were considering there is Thornton Park's tennis courts need to be replaced, and there's an option for us to take that burden from the city and do that at the middle school. I think to the heart of it, though, is what trade-offs are we willing to make? Are we willing to give up backyard pickup if that means we can get that thing we want in the schools? Does it mean we are, maybe the city could allocate part of the 0.5% income tax increase to some of the other entities to help on that front, or to provide a tax incentive for, by increasing the credit as a result of the Cleveland increase. So those kinds of more creative things would kind of break some of the boundaries and barriers. But I think this group wants to work together. There aren't any of us standing up and saying, I shall not and I will not. It's a challenge. It is a real challenge with those pressing needs that come upon us every day.
Thank you. Next is real estate issues. So many houses seem to be sitting for long periods of time with no interested buyer. Yet other houses are being snapped up. How is the real estate market in Shaker? What is it like elsewhere in Greater Cleveland? Are we remaining competitive? Who would like to take that? Looks like down here.
I've worked in the area of housing now for 21 years, plus the additional years that I was a resident involved in housing initiatives in South Shaker. And we recently have communicated with Howard Hanna and asking them really what it is that is what are the forces that are most challenging our housing market today. And as the mayor mentioned initially, what we have is a large a nationwide downturn in housing that has impacted some areas more than others. Cleveland is behind the curve. Many other areas in the nation have accelerated and have recovered their housing values. Alas, we have not. And certain income brackets or certain housing brackets, price-wise, have not recovered in our community as well as others. That said, there is a saying that in Shaker, you buy not just the house, you buy the house plus the taxes. And that's why the city has made the point that if, to the degree that we can keep the tax threshold minimal in terms of its increase, then we stand a better chance of invigorating the housing market, especially in those categories of higher price bracket houses that may be stalled or not moving as fast as we wish.
Anyone else wish to comment?
It's a structural challenge we have. You will see the homes that are renovated and priced in competitive price buckets, they're selling quickly. You see the for sale signs going up. Keller Williams gave us some insight that said the market's actually pretty good. There are some housing values, though, where the value is not there. Either because the homeowner who used to buy that house maybe is not shopping in our area because Eaton is not downtown anymore and they're going a little further out. Or other variables that may be going into that. Maybe that job isn't downtown at all anymore. So I think we need to think not only about how do we sell those homes, but maybe how do we start thinking about positioning those properties differently going forward, because we may not have as strong a base as we once did. We were talking about the historical base for those types of homes. But that's a challenge. It's something that would really be considered and thought about on a much higher level.
Anyone else? Okay. Next question. Why is the due diligence being done by the library board being perceived as a conflict with the mayor's goal of growing Shaker? Shouldn't the residents decide?
Well, certainly. So we're, well, I think that's an important point. Again, we're the Board of Trustees, right? We are volunteers that step forward and interview and serve for a term of 7 years as trustees, basically to determine how best, or what we would recommend once we kind of learn the issues about how we manage that library asset. I think as you've seen through the process that, Director Amy described, as we've explored this and the board has learned things, we have checked in with the community frequently, and we'll continue to do so as we continue to refine our process to make sure the way that we're looking at it is largely consistent with how people use the library and what they expect from this institution. But absolutely, we are in a republic, and while we may come up here and recommend all this stuff, nothing will happen. In a republic, the people are sovereign. Any tax increase is required to be approved by voters, and after that dialogue, the voters will have the final say on what we'll do.
Sure.
So the way the question was phrased is, why is the library's due diligence in conflict with the mayor's goal of growing Shaker Heights? So what the mayor looked at, and specifically the mayor's financial task force looked at, is the overall financial burden on the residents of Shaker Heights. And the conclusion was that the overall financial burden today is already very steep. We are very expensive as a community, whether you're looking to buy a home here or whether you're looking to locate your business here. In some cases, we are 2 or 3 times more expensive already than surrounding communities. So, with the goal in mind of having more people move into the community, that trade-off, the more difficult that gets with further tax increases, means that it's a smaller and smaller pool of people who would consider our community. So that's the line of thinking that connects the level of taxation to the choices that people make to move into Shaker, and indeed the choices that people who already live here make. One other comment I want to make is Shaker is a very diverse community. We have very wealthy areas, and we have about a 12% poverty rate in Shaker Heights as well. And when I talk to people about it, I often hear them say, well, we can afford it. Well, not all of us. I remember a number of years ago when I was knocking on doors, and a woman let me into her home, and she was a steel worker, and she said to me, Trey, I love Shaker Heights. It's more expensive than where I moved from in Cleveland, but I wanted to be here because I wanted my children to be in this school, I wanted to be in this beautiful home, I wanted to be in this beautiful neighborhood. But you see this room back here? It has a leak in it. And if my taxes were a little bit lower, I could fix that leak. So when we talk about tax increases, we need to remember that we are making some trade-offs for some people in our community who actually cannot afford that incremental tax, and it's coming out of disposable income.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think it's also just important to note that the library is a very small part of Shaker's tax burden, and we've been very slow to come to the community. And we definitely want to be part of the solution, but the library alone is by no means able to be the whole solution to the issue.
Anyone else? Okay. This is an interesting one. The language by City Council tonight is very different from what the residents heard in 2012 when they argued a 0.5% income tax increase was absolutely essential. It seems disingenuous to ask the other taxing authorities to put off a proposed tax increase when they themselves did not.
I knew that was coming. I worked that issue very hard, and I probably could best explain it by saying that all of our tax increases, the city, schools, and the library, have been driven by revenue reductions. Revenues at the state level, specifically in our case, and some of the revenues at the local level in the case of the library, where real estate appraisals for Cuyahoga County went down instead of going up, and affected their revenues and their whole revenue stream. I understand that it could be seen as very hypocritical that we went on the ballot and asked for that tax increase. But what it was a rebalancing of the tax burden at the state level. The state had reduced its income taxes at the state level by 21% over multiple years. And along with that reduction in the state income tax, they had reduced the local government fund that we received. They had totally eliminated the estate tax. So we were faced with the issue of if we were to deliver similar services then as we delivered in the past, then we had to present that choice to the voters. Otherwise, we would have had to go back, just like the schools would have to go back and have done in the past. And if they failed an issue, they had to cut services. They had to cut teachers, they had to cut program, etc. So we're all in the same boat here, and none of us think we're any better or have better answers than the other. What we're saying is that we need to begin a much more thorough joint planning process and use breaks of each other's authority and each other's perspective to look at the amounts that we're defining our tax increases for. And I will just add that the mayor has vowed not to return to the ballot again, and so far so good.
Any other?
I certainly share the concern about reduced levels of state funding. I'd just like to highlight that the library is also operating under a reduction in state funding. That state funding reduction happened about the same time. It was triggered by the budget issues, right, with the state. And the state funding from the library from 2009 dropped by about, I believe it's 17% over that period. Now, we also had a reduction, obviously, in the property tax. What we've done over that period is we really looked at where we could kind of tighten our belt, and there were some things that we reduced staff. In some cases, we reduced hours. I think in some of those cases, as we've looked at it and we've done this study, we look at those changes and we're like, you know what, we can live with that. Things like self-checkout that we worried about a little bit before, are efficiencies that we look at and say, you know what, that's probably the right balance for the community. There are other reductions that we've kind of looked at, cutting hours, for example. We say, hey, we've really seen some decreased usage. So we also face this similar issue. We've worked through that over a number of years. And part of the consideration about what you're seeing here is what we think that right balance is in terms of replacing the state funding and what services that you demand from the library.
Other comments? Thank you. bunch of questions here that are all sort of the same, and they refer back to Nancy Moore's statement about silos. And so the question is, do people agree with the characterization of these being in silos? And if so, what is needed for the school's library and city to collaborate and get out of those silos and make some progress? Who would like to tackle that first?
Well, let me at least start. I don't know if I have 100% of the answer, but one thing I would like to urge, sometimes it does look like that we're in silos. There can be points of time, though, where I think you see kind of groups rally together. First of all, most people don't know that this or many people that have moved here don't know that this building was the old main library. Okay? There was a change in 25 years ago, right, where the schools needed to look at reducing the number of buildings that they had, and there was a big effort by the city and the library to help be part of that solution. As part of that, this building was transferred to the city, and the library moved over to the vacated Moreland School building, and the city of Shaker Heights issued a bond paid for by the library that allowed the first floor renovations. There are many small collaborations that happen today that you may not see. For example, one of the things Amy and her team does very well is they do some very important mundane things. So for example, things like success, that sounds wrong, but they're important. Things like having school software on library computers, right? So success makers, so if kids need to drill seamlessly from the schools, they can do that. It can also be on larger, flashier things. We've had a multi-year program called Art Exposed, where we take some of the outstanding artwork out of the Shaker Heights High School and put it in the path of people that may not have kids in the high school, so they can appreciate really what their tax dollars do in terms of emphasizing achievement. So I think there's some of that stuff there. Where I think we could work better is maybe some of these bigger long-term strategic visions with kind of an open solution. You know, how do we commonly work towards a goal, maybe versus a supposition of maybe certain goals. So I'm not sure how to do that, right? But I think that's something we're all trying to be working on.
Thank you, Chad.
Sorry, call it mundane.
It's not mundane, it's super important. But you know, we do a lot of work with the schools. I mean, another thing that we're talking about is being involved in the self camps next summer. We have a community engagement librarian who's actively out in the community and who is really active in the Moreland Neighbor Nights and working to help facilitate those. And we see that as an important thing that we're doing to help support the city's housing plan in terms of revitalizing the Moreland neighborhood. And in fact, we're so focused on community engagement and that collaboration that we are just in the process. We just advertised a change in a youth services librarian position with a community engagement focus. So we're actually expanding the number of librarians we have whose job title is community engagement to be out in the community and getting rid of silos.
Okay, thank you.
I wouldn't characterize silos. I've been thoughtful about this one and kind of reflecting on the interactions that happen between city council and the mayor, the library board, and the schools. There are interactions and discussions. Planning is done. Programs are shared. We talk about what is up and coming. The rub maybe is a couple of things. One, the city is the city of Shaker Heights. The library and the schools are the school district, which is inclusive of a portion of Cleveland. So about 12% of our students are coming out of Cleveland under a 100+ year agreement. So we do have a little different service area than library, school, and then the city also think through. Then the real challenge is we're into the messy part of finance. How do we share revenue as three distinct entities with different taxing authorities? How do we make sure that we then take that information back to residents, not all the same constituents, but the residents therein, and say, we need to make trade-offs. Are we going to do backyard garbage pickup, or are we going to fix a library? Are we going to fix a library, or are we going to build a foundation for a new middle school that will allow us to have a building that's stable going forward? How do you have that conversation? You all will come to this kind of discussion. We need 20,000 people almost coming to this discussion and starting to give input into how we think through that. It is worthy of a try. It is worthy of a try. We need to get there.
And I see a response from the city council.
Yes, now for the city perspective. There are silos. There is a discussion as well. So let's differentiate these two. What tends to happen is each of these three groups, of no fault of their own, this is the way things have been done for a long way. And by the way, many other cities operate this way as well. So this is about taking something that's good and making it even better without pointing fingers at any individual or any group. Traditionally, what happens is each group within their silo will develop a strategic plan, will develop priorities, will do their own surveying, will create their own budget, and then when you get to the top of that process, some 6 months, 9 months, a year down the road, you then share it. What we're looking for, and I believe what Nancy's point was, which I agree with, is we need to have more cross-collaboration at lower points in that process. What is it that you want to do, school board? What are you looking at 2 years from now? What are you looking at 5 years from now, library trustees? How can we work together on that? The lack of having that collaboration has led to a couple of well-known examples now, and I'll use one that Annette Sutherland from the school board, who's sitting here, has talked about as well, and that is snowplow services. So the Bertram Woods branch of the library has its own snowplow. The school district has their own snowplows. The city, of course, has its own snowplows. When the school's plow is plowing the middle school, why can't it go across the street and get the library as well? Well, the answer I've been given is, well, but who gets to go first, and how do we prioritize, and so on. That's solvable. That's solvable. So for the people of Shaker Heights who simply want their snow to be plowed and don't necessarily care which government entity does it, we can do better there. And by breaking out of these silos, we can have that kind of discussion, and using the snow plowing is just a simple example. There's many other things like this where we can probably improve the quality of service and we can lower the cost.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in?
So I appreciate this concept of jointness. My name is Stephen Wilkins, as superintendent, and I have a military background. So this reminds me of a discussion among my peers about how we cooperate more together across different branches and services. So I think a couple of things stand out to keep in mind is the difference between cooperation and collaboration. It's just in my short time here in Shaker, we do a great deal of cooperation. I talk to the city, I talk to the library, and we do things. For example, Bill mentioned, purchasing a salt. So I can write a city contract and get some things done and save some money and operate a little bit more efficiently. So we cooperate very well. But as Trey mentioned, we're talking about collaboration. And collaboration is used for some of your most complex problems, because neither one of our taxing entities here can solve the problem that we're thinking about here for Shaker. We all have to come together. So if you can imagine the Venn diagram, what we're suggesting is, I think is what I'm hearing, is that each entity has its own sphere of influence. It's how do you bring those spheres together, and in that overlap area, what can we do to make that overlap area operate more efficiently? And I think that certainly on the school side, we would be very pleased to participate in such a discussion.
I see a lot of nodding heads. That's good. That's why we're here. Did anyone else want to say anything? So there's a number of questions about taxes. So I'm going to read several, and then you can put them together. Is the city willing to share the 0.5% tax increase or offer credits to offset some of the needs of the library and schools to keep tax increases down? Let me find the next one. Can the 3 taxing authorities extend the time between tax increases to 10 years. The Cleveland Heights Library recently passed a 2.2 mil levy despite the same high tax burden and school improvements that also taxed residents. They recognize the importance of these assets. So are you willing to let Cleveland Heights pass us by? So, there.
I have a very brief response just to one of those questions. Are we willing to let Cleveland Heights pass us by in the rate of taxation? Yes.
To Steve Wilkins' point about cooperation and collaboration, I just want to answer the issue of is the city willing to share its 0.5% tax increase with the schools and the library? Good question. However, I will just say that we are limited by statute as to what we can do with our revenues and how we can spend those. So I would be very, I remember when we were on the school board, when I was on the school board, the issue came up of why couldn't the city allocate some of its charter millage to the schools and help break the cycle of the perpetual return to the ballot with House Bill, forced by House Bill 920. So there are some things we can do and some things we can't do. All of those things need to be put on the table and obviously looked at. But the short answer is we're limited by statute.
Anyone else?
So I should do this, be careful doing this outside of the board meeting, but I think I speak for all our board members that we are open to exploring sharing city revenue. In particular, $4.1 million of what we're talking about is to repair the main library that is owned by the city of Shaker Heights. Our lease stipulates that the library is responsible for maintenance, but again, we stand ready to renegotiate that. But in terms of the 10-year pledge, I think you saw that. I do think that is important. We do on the board, when we went through the financial crisis and we faced the loss of about 20% of our revenue, we really did have a question about how we were going to react to that. And again, people were hurting, right? Property values were down, and we really decided over that period, okay, let's see what we can do with the revenue that's being provided today. And again, there's some things that came out of that we probably wouldn't have tried if we hadn't gone forward the approach. There's some things that we tried after that we've looked at and said maybe that's not exactly right. But we do think that 10-year pledge, I'm glad I said it was 10, is important. So people have a sense for what we're committing to when we ask you to commit to us.
We too would love to share in the city's income. No, I think the second part of that question, if I heard it correctly, was also credit, and that could be something that entices residents to move to the area and stay, and that certainly is something the city, it's in the city's purview. 10 years between the ask of money. So the schools, we're on a 12-year cycle at this point for asking for capital dollars. We've stretched that well beyond what historically we've done. We've gotten very creative about how we could fix things that needed to be fixed and pushing it as far as possible because the entire board has a strong appreciation for the tax burden of the community. What we're asking for now or considering now is based on those core needs. We're not trying to be Cleveland Heights and building all new buildings. That's, I think, some might say quite challenging, even though the community has supported it. We're looking at the core needs and what's really helping us build foundations for the future so a city will continue to be known by the schools that it keeps. I'll pause there.
Any other comments? Okay, next few are going to be directed to specific people. So they wanted to put you on the hot seat. So we'll start with William Clawson. can you elaborate more of the current school levy, or more about the current school levy, and your comments about the expirations of that levy? What is the real tax increase to residents?
So for clarity, I just want to get the point straight, and you have the documents with you. The two options that are proposed show $132 per 100,000 or 3.8 mil levy for the 30 million or option A. Option B is a slightly larger 4.7 mil or 165 per 100,000, and you see the per month there as well. We have capital bonds that have been issued, typically for about 20 years, from past levies that were used to improve the schools, to extend the cafeteria and repair roofs and all those sorts of things. Those are expired, some of those are expiring. Very specifically, 1 mil falls off in 2020, and then the remaining 2.3 mils that are coming due fall off in 2026. So I have that right, Mr. Chrisman?
Right.
So under that option, let's start with option A. Taxpayers would be paying about a $0.5 mil incremental. Under option B, it's about 1.4 mil incremental after those bonds expire. Is that fair?
Someone else?
Yes. Okay. These questions are all directed to the library for Chad. But you can answer them too. Okay. If you choose the 7th option, turning assets over to the county, can we be assured of having at least one library facility in Shaker? Do the voters realize that if the library went with the county, the burden for future capital and operating needs would be absorbed by that system? And 3, what are the disadvantages of joining the Cuyahoga County Library?
Sure, I think there's one. So the first question has to do with how many facilities are likely to be operated by the Cuyahoga County Library under inclusion. So again, we did pose this question to the county, and the county did not directly answer it, right? So what I'll have to give you is kind of a, let me back up. If you'd like to look at all these answers, there's a 12-page synopsis, again, put on the web with analysis that kind of gives a flavor for our best interpretation. There are some answers the county did give us, but basically how the Shaker Library would look under service equity, which is their standard. Although we didn't get direct answers from the Cuyahoga County Library, they have been doing a big building program, right? They have 27 buildings, and they've applied a set of 3 very specific criteria to what buildings they would do, when they would renovate, when they would close, when they would replace with new. So we use that to kind of guide the analysis. The first answer is we don't have a specific assurance. We think it's likely there would be at least one, because there's only one school district in Cuyahoga County that's served by the county that doesn't have a library. So we think it's just one. We don't have an assurance. The second thing with respect to future capital and operating needs, yes, that's absolutely right. There are trade-offs with it, with the Shaker Library, right? We are not indebted. The Cuyahoga County Library, because they've done a very substantial building program, has about $65 million in debt, right? So their ability to do an incremental capital, right, is going to have to be balanced by the resources that they have coming in. They were obviously hit by the downturn and the cuts in public library funding just as us. And the specific disadvantages, largely that we can't really guarantee what the outcome or what the look of your library would be. But there are advantages in Shaker Heights collection. There's advantages in the specific programs that Shaker does, just focusing on Shaker. And you're guaranteed a historic library building in 2 branches.
Anyone else wanted to comment? Okay, Councilmember Roeder, argues that Shaker must find a way to provide services for less dollars, yet the council is currently engaged in the budgeting process where there are virtually no reductions in expenditures despite recommendation from the mayor's task force. How specifically is council implementing efficiencies in city government? And this comes to the end of the table.
Thank you. So the question is how specifically is city implementing cuts? First, I'm not sure that I agree with the first premise of the question, that nothing is being done to save cost. There are constantly items that the mayor and the directors are working on to tighten their budgets and find more efficient ways to do their work, whether it's through RFP processes or collaboration within the city or other means. The larger question, though, is what can the city do in order to bend the cost curve, in order to offer those services at a lower cost? So I'll give you one specific example, and and it has to do with collaboration, but I'll take the pressure off the table here and point to University Heights, since they're not in the room to defend themselves. Under the leadership of Mayor Leiken and the council that preceded me, a detailed study was done looking at a fire department merger. And we revisited this year. Under this study, if we join fire departments with University Heights, we actually improve the quality of our service and we lower the cost. How do we improve the quality of the service? We can share equipment with each other, we can share staff. Do you realize now in University Heights, due to budget cuts, they no longer do safety checks for baby seats? If we were to combine, they would be able to offer that service again. They no longer do the level of inspections that they would like to be able to do. This study further argues that we would save about $1 million per year between the two communities. Just one example of that, you, as taxpayers here in Shaker Heights, recently spent about $1 million on a ladder truck. It's an important piece of equipment that's only required for its intended full purpose perhaps several times a year. Well, if we were to join with University Heights, they would pay a proportionate share of that, let's say 30%. That would be $300,000 that would come back to the community of Shaker Heights, and it would save them the $700,000 they would need to buy a new ladder truck. So that's a sort of example of things that we all need to challenge ourselves to do that maintain, or in this case, improve quality of service at a lower cost.
I'd like to add one, there are many different financial facts. You know, all of them are testimony to the fact that the city is very tight. And since 2007, we reduced our workforce from 356 full-time equivalent employees to 290, and we're holding firm. The areas that are absolutely needed are police, and obviously we're cutting safety forces as Trey had mentioned in reducing as retirements come, sometimes our safety forces, and specifically fire, are being reduced to 50 now. In addition to that, though, the city has a long-standing policy of cash reserve, and we have to do this because with the impending vicissitudes of the economy, there is a prediction that we're going to be facing another recession in 3 to 5 years. And if that happens, our cash balance is the only thing that stands between us and a negative budget, or in the red, which we cannot run by state law. So those are our constraints.
Okay, thank you. And this will probably go back to the council members generally, but maybe others will have a comment. One advantage that other communities like Solon and Beechwood have is a greater business tax base. What can Shaker do to be more business friendly? The incubator launch house was eliminated. Other cities like Beechwood are more aggressive at attracting businesses. How can Shaker attract businesses in addition to the Van Aken district improvements?
Thank you, excellent question. And again, because I see we're getting close to our time, I want to thank everyone for being here and all of you for being here. So I'll start with the launch house being eliminated. Launch house had a 5-year lease that expired. They were offered to renew the lease and chose not to, so the city looked into other options, which led to the dealership now being in that space. So in a sense, it has a similar vision as it did before, but now it's being led by the Shaker Heights Development Corporation, a not-for-profit organization, which is able to not only realize the goal of incubating businesses, but also work more broadly with the community to achieve some of our greater goals around youth, around community building. How do we build the commercial tax base? Well, the question highlighted the Warrensville Van Aiken development, which is critical. That's a $100 million development that was probably 10 years or more in the making. It goes back to Mayor Rawson. And a lot of people worked very hard on this for a very long period of time. That is not only going to contribute greatly to our community, but it positions us for a phase 2. And the phase 2, which would be a taller commercial space, some additional residential buildings, would contribute significantly financially to our community. The last thing I want to say in this topic is we have ourselves in a little bit of a chicken and egg situation in that it's hard for businesses to move to Shaker because our taxes are so high. So each time we raise our taxes, we make it a little bit harder for ourselves. That's why the vision that I would argue is the best one is to maintain or improve those services while holding the line on cost. Let's let those other communities around us raise their taxes. We become more competitive. We are better able then to bring businesses into Shaker Heights.
One other instance, too, of the city's efforts to try and save your tax dollars and put them to better use or different use is with Launch House. We plowed over $500,000 just into the capital part of making Launch House a building that could house the entrepreneurial business initiative. And there were many more, I guess, maintenance costs that were invested in that. When push came to shove, those businesses that were developed did not choose to stay in Shaker, in large part because of the cost of startup businesses and our tax threshold. So what we did in trying to change the leadership into what we now call the dealership at Launch House, what used to be Launch House, is we have the same thrust to develop and grow our business sector, especially on Lee Road. So to the question, what can we do to better encourage business besides Warrensville Van Aiken? We have the Lee Road corridor that, albeit has much smaller businesses in it, but we're basically taking possession of the businesses. We're demolishing those that no longer have the potential to be the businesses that they were built for. And the Shaker Heights Development Corporation is taking an active role in actually paying for the maintenance of the building now, and the tax dollars that you give the city are not being funneled into businesses that don't stay in Shaker.
Quickly, the question was on the mark. 50% of the school income or revenue in Beechwood is coming from commercial entities. It's 20-25% and so on. So that's a big gap. And it's not something that developed overnight. It took many, many years. It was part of our strategic vision. Shaker is closer to 10%. The schools are also helping, and I want to make sure my colleagues would appreciate this as well. On the Van Aiken district, we're strong believers in the activity there, and that's why we've agreed to tax incremental financing and improve that to help attract the developer and get the businesses started there. That long term, we hope, will really help us, but that's going to take many, many years before we'll see those incremental tax dollars coming from Van Aiken or the Transit Village. And then Lee Road, I think we have opportunities there long term. School owns properties on Lee Road, and if there's a development there, we might be able to figure out a way to, heaven forbid, relocate that bus garage, things there. But other properties, our IT center is there, for example, as well. So plenty of opportunities to collaborate.
Thank you. we have run past, but I would like to just finish this up with one final question. And I just want to pass the microphone down the road and you answer it in one sentence or less. It might be one word, it might be one phrase, one sentence, but just to sort of see where we've come tonight. How would a joint planning group make decisions? Should the elected leaders make decisions with or without extensive reliance on polls and voters? And, or I might rephrase that. Can you give one idea that you've come up with on how you can collaborate? One word.
Snowplows.
Economic development. I'd like to see how the library can play a role in
Those are great. I just threw out a couple of my better ideas around Lee Road. The making sure we are thoughtful in getting not a year or two into the future, but 10, 15, 20 years into the future and getting around that table. Too many words, I'm sorry.
I'll simply say long-term planning.
Open, collaborative dialogue with the community, with these groups represented at the table, and with other communities.
I want to see long-term joint planning between all three entities on an ongoing basis, and I want it to be inclusive of staff as well as elected officials or appointed officials.
Thanks to all of you. As usual, Shaker's elected and appointed and hired officials are super impressive. And we thank you all for coming.
Moderating this evening. I'd like to introduce our legacy fellow, Oza Oregon. She's a student at Shaker Heights High School. She's covering this for the Shaker Egg this evening. And why don't you say hello?
Hello. I just wanted to say it's so good to see so many people that have like an active passion for the community. As a student who has services, I go to the library, I go to the school, like my parents live in the city. So it's really reassuring to know that everyone here really cares about these issues. I'm really pleased to see so many people, so thank you so much for being here.
And be sure to take a look at our graphics.
I forgot. Funny and Bernard, our graphic this beautiful evening is being recorded up there. You might want to show it at the library.